In the fall of 1887, Dust Creek, Montana was a town that held its breath. It was a place carved from grit and silence, where a man's worth was measured by the sweat on his brow and the steadiness of his gaze. And no man's gaze was steadier than Logan Braxton's. He rode down Main Street not like a man who owned the valley, but like a man who understood its language. His shoulders were broad, his hands were calloused, and his reputation was as solid as the mountains that watched over them all. He'd started with nothing. An orphan, the son of a forgotten ranch hand. Now the Braxton Ranch was the heart of the territory. Its cattle the finest, its fences the strongest, but respect doesn't keep a man warm at night. And Logan's house, for all its strength, had been empty for a very long time. He swung off his horse outside the general store, the leather of his saddle groaning a familiar song. And that's when he saw her. A ghost. She was sitting on the steps of the old abandoned church, a place where prayers had long since faded into dust. Her dress was the color of a washed-out sky, her shawl pulled so tight it seemed to be the only thing holding her together, and huddled beside her like two small shadows were a pair of little girls, twins. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide and empty. They didn't speak. They didn't even seem to breathe. Logan stopped. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Because he knew that face. He knew the stubborn set of her jaw, the way a single strand of hair escaped her bun to curl against her cheek. Olivia McAllister, the farmer's daughter who could outspell any boy in the schoolhouse. The girl who had kissed him once, just once, behind the giant cottonwood tree on his father's land. A lifetime ago. He hadn't seen her in 10 years. Not since the day she'd ridden out of Dust Creek on the arm of a gambler with slicked back hair and promises as cheap as his cologne. Jedediah Miller. The whole town had talked. They'd whispered. They'd judged. Logan had said nothing. He just kept working, kept building, kept waiting for a woman who had never promised to return. She looked up, her eyes squinting against the harsh afternoon sun. And when they met his, something inside her expression didn't just crack. It shattered. "Logan?" Her voice was a wisp of smoke, a sound he thought he'd never hear again. He walked toward her, his boots slow and deliberate on the dusty ground. "It's been a long time, Olivia." The little girls pressed closer to their mother, their silence a wall around them. Olivia didn't rise. She didn't cry. She just stared, as if he were a mirage she was afraid to believe in. Logan didn't ask where she'd been. He didn't ask what had happened to the fire in her eyes. Some questions are too heavy to ask all at once, so he just offered his hand, a simple gesture, a bridge across a decade of silence and pain. And Olivia, after a pause that felt like it stretched for an eternity, placed her hand in his. It was cold, and it was trembling. He helped her onto his horse, her movements slow and fragile. Then he lifted each of the silent girls, one by one, and settled them in front of her, tucked safely between her arms. He didn't mount up himself. He took the reins in his hand and started walking, leading them home. The man who had never stopped waiting, the woman who had finally run out of places to run, and two little girls who hadn't spoken a single word. They were riding toward the Braxton Ranch, the only place left in the world that might still remember their mother's name. But what Logan didn't know was that they weren't just bringing their past with them. They were bringing a darkness that would threaten to consume everything he had ever built. The ride to the Braxton Ranch was a silent one. The sun bled out across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and dying embers. The house rose from the ridge like a promise kept, its timber walls solid, its windows glowing with a warm, welcoming light. Clara Bennett, Logan's housekeeper, stood on the porch. She was a woman as tough and weathered as the land itself, with eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Olivia, at the hollows under her eyes, and the threadbare shawl. She saw the two silent children clinging to her. Clara didn't ask a single question. She just turned, her apron dusted with flour, and went back inside to put 2 more plates on the table. Clara doesn't pry, Logan said, his voice a low rumble. I'm not ready for answers, Olivia whispered back. Inside, a fire crackled in the great stone hearth. The air smelled of beef stew and fresh-baked bread. It smelled like safety, a concept Olivia had long since forgotten. She fed the girls first, her hands moving with a mechanical steadiness that betrayed the exhaustion deep in her bones. The twins ate without a sound, their eyes darting around the room, taking in every detail. Later, after the girls were tucked into a soft feather bed upstairs, their small forms finally surrendering to a sleep that wasn't haunted by the cold, Olivia stepped back out onto the porch. The stars were scattered across the black velvet sky like diamonds on a jeweler's cloth. Logan was there, leaning against a post, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. You didn't have to do this, she said, her voice barely carrying on the night air. I didn't do it out of pity, Olivia. Then why? He was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the chirping of crickets in the tall grass. Because I remember who you were, he said finally. Before him. Before all of this. She turned to him, a flicker of the old defiance in her eyes. That girl is long gone, Logan. He finally looked at her, and his gaze was so direct, so honest it felt like a physical touch. No, he said. She's not gone. She's just tired. And in that moment, something shifted. The wall she had built around her heart, brick by painful brick, developed a tiny crack. She remembered walking home from school, the dust warm between her toes. She remembered Logan, the quiet boy who always seemed to be there, carrying her books without being asked. I used to think you were too quiet, she confessed, a faint smile touching her lips. He allowed himself a small smile in return. And I used to think you'd never notice me at all. I noticed, she said softly. I always noticed. The silence that fell between them now wasn't empty. It was filled with unspoken history, with the ghosts of what might have been. But as the night deepened around them, a new feeling began to take root. It wasn't hope. Not yet. It was something smaller, more fragile, the possibility of a beginning. But the shadows of the past are long. And the one that followed Olivia McAllister was darker and more dangerous than either of them could possibly imagine. It was already creeping towards the ranch, silent and unseen. The next morning, Logan found it. He was checking the barn door, making sure the latch was secure, when his eyes caught something that made the blood run cold in his veins. Carved into the weathered wood, fresh and deep, was a symbol. A rattlesnake coiled and ready to strike. He ran his fingers over the sharp edges of the carving. It wasn't the work of some random vandal. It was a message, a brand. He knew that mark. He hadn't seen it in 10 years, but you don't forget something like that. It was the personal sign of Jedediah Miller. Logan's mind reeled. It was impossible. The rumors that had trickled back to Dust Creek years ago had been clear. Jed was dead, killed in a high-stakes card game down in a dusty border town. Logan had never questioned it. He had wanted it to be true. He quickly took a wood plane and shaved the symbol from the door, the curls of wood falling to the ground like dead skin. He told no one, not Clara, and especially not Olivia. She was just starting to breathe again. Her daughters, Annie and Ellie, had even been seen chasing butterflies in the yard, though they still hadn't spoken a word. He wouldn't let this ghost, this specter from a buried past, terrorize them. But the symbol was just the beginning. A few days later, Logan's prize bull, a magnificent beast worth a small fortune, was found lying in the pasture, groaning in agony. Its eyes were glazed, foam flecked its lips. The vet was called. The diagnosis was swift. Poison, deliberate, malicious. Clara Bennett pursed her lips, her eyes darting towards the main house where Olivia was hanging laundry on the line. "Bad luck followed her here, Logan," she muttered, her voice low. "Some people carry storms with them." Logan's jaw tightened. "It's not Olivia's fault, Clara." But the seed of doubt had been planted. The ranch hands grew quiet whenever Olivia was near. They exchanged uneasy glances. The fragile peace she had found began to fray at the edges. Then, a week later, a 50-foot section of fence along the northern ridge was cut. Cleanly, deliberately. 24 head of cattle wandered off into the rugged hills. It took Logan and his men 2 days of hard riding to round them all up. It was sabotage, a slow, creeping campaign of terror designed to unnerve him, to hit him where he was most vulnerable. He started patrolling the property at night, a rifle in his hands, his senses on high alert. He was a man defending his fortress, but he didn't know where the enemy was, or who it was. He still clung to the belief that Jed was dead. This had to be an old associate, someone with a grudge, but the feeling of being watched was constant. A prickling on the back of his neck. A flicker of movement at the edge of his vision. The pressure was immense. He was trying to protect his ranch, his legacy. But more than that, he was trying to protect the woman in his house, the woman who was slowly, cautiously, beginning to trust him. One evening, he was sitting on the porch steps, cleaning his rifle, when a tiny hand touched his arm. It was Annie, one of the twins. She stood beside him, her small face serious, her eyes fixed on the distant hills, now cloaked in shadow. She had never spoken a word to him, not once. He waited, his heart pounding in his chest. And then she whispered. Her voice was as soft as a moth's wing, but the words hit him like a physical blow. "The Snake Man," she breathed. "He watches from the trees." Logan went still. "The Snake Man, Annie? What does he look like?" She didn't look at him. She just kept staring at the ridge. "He wears the snake on his hand," she whispered. "It shines." A silver ring, shaped like a coiled rattlesnake. Jedediah Miller's ring. It was him. He wasn't dead. He wasn't a ghost. He was here. He was real. And he was hunting them. The next morning, Logan rode into Dust Creek with a storm brewing in his eyes. The town felt different. The usual morning bustle was there, but underneath it was a current of excitement, of something new. He tied his horse outside the saloon, the same place he'd confronted ghosts before. But this time, the ghost was flesh and blood. He pushed through the swinging doors, and the piano music stuttered to a halt. And there he was, Jedediah Miller. He was sitting at a corner table, a deck of cards in his hand, a glass of whiskey at his elbow. But he wasn't the scruffy, desperate gambler Logan remembered. His suit was tailored, his boots were polished to a mirror shine, and his hair was slicked back with expensive pomade. He looked prosperous. He looked up as Logan approached, and a slow, lazy smile spread across his face. A predator's smile. "Well, I'll be," Jed drawled, his voice smooth as silk. "Logan Braxton, the golden boy of Dust Creek." "You have no business here, Miller," Logan said, his voice a low growl. Jed chuckled, a sound that grated on Logan's nerves. "Actually, I have a great deal of business here, but you can call me Mr. Jericho now. Jedediah Miller is a name from a past I've left behind." The saloon was dead silent. Every eye was on them. "Olivia and the girls are with me," Logan stated, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "You stay away from them." Jed's smile widened. He leaned forward, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper that still carried through the entire room. "Ah, yes, my dear Olivia, and my precious daughters. I've been looking for them for a very long time." He stood up, his movements fluid and confident. He addressed the silent onlookers. "You see, my friends," he said, his voice filled with a convincing sorrow. "There was a misunderstanding, a terrible argument. My beloved Olivia, bless her heart, she fled in the night, took my girls. I've spent years and a considerable fortune tracking them down." He turned his gaze back to Logan, and his eyes were cold as ice. "And imagine my surprise when I find them here, being held on the ranch of a man who has always been jealous of what we had." The narrative had been flipped. In an instant, Logan was no longer the rescuer. He was the villain, the captor. "He's lying," Logan said, but his words felt weak against the polished performance Jed was giving. "Am I?" Jed challenged, taking a step closer. "Then why haven't you told the sheriff they're with you? Why are you hiding them away? A man with nothing to hide, Logan, doesn't operate in the shadows." The townspeople were murmuring. They were looking at Logan differently now, with suspicion. Jed had not just returned. He had returned with wealth, with influence, and with a story that painted him as the victim. He had poisoned the well. "I'm here to reclaim my family," Jed announced, his voice ringing with false righteousness. "And I will not be deterred by a lonely rancher with a grudge." He had laid a trap, and Logan had walked right into it. The very next day, the sheriff rode out to the Braxton ranch. Sheriff Brody was a man who generally tried to do the right thing, but he was also a man who enjoyed a game of poker a little too much. And as Logan saw the unease in his eyes, he knew Jed had gotten to him. "Logan," Brody said, not quite meeting his eye, "I've had a formal complaint filed. Mr. Jericho, Jedediah Miller, claims you're holding his family against their will." Olivia, who had come out onto the porch, went pale. "That's a lie," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "He abandoned us." The sheriff shifted his weight. "Be that as it may, Olivia, he's their father. He has rights. He wants to see his daughters." Logan stepped forward. "Over my dead body." "Don't make this difficult, Logan," Brody warned. "Right now, this is a civil matter. But if you obstruct him, it becomes a criminal one. Kidnapping is a serious charge." They were trapped, legally cornered. Jed had them in a checkmate. He could come to the ranch any time he wanted, under the guise of visiting his children, and there was nothing they could do to stop him. He was using the law as a weapon, and he was just getting started. Jed began to weave his web around Dust Creek. He bought drinks for everyone at the saloon. He made generous donations to the church repair fund. He spoke of building a new school, of bringing prosperity to the valley. He was a snake, but he was a charming one. And he used every opportunity to isolate Logan. He'd ride out to the ranch, Sheriff Brody in tow, and demand to see Annie and Ellie. The girls would hide behind Olivia, their silence more damning than any accusation. Jed would just sigh dramatically. "You see, Sheriff, he's turned them against me." The sabotage on the ranch continued, but it was smarter now, more subtle. A contaminated water trough that sickened a dozen horses. A rumor started in town that Logan was hoarding grain and price gouging his neighbors. Logan was fighting a war on two fronts, one for his land and one for his name. And it felt like he was losing. Olivia watched, her heart filled with a terrible, familiar despair. She had come here to escape her past, but it had followed her and was now trying to destroy the only man who had ever offered her a true home. She refused to be a damsel in distress. She had survived Jed once before. She would not let him win. She had to fight back. But how do you fight a man who wears a mask of respectability? How do you expose a liar when everyone wants to believe his lies? She started to think back. To the years on the run, to the whispered conversations she'd overheard, the names, the places. There was one name Jed used to mention, always in a hushed, fearful tone. Cyrus Blackwood. She remembered Jed saying he was a powerful man from up north, a man you didn't cross. It was a long shot, a needle in a haystack, but it was all she had. There was a stagecoach driver, an old man named Silas, who had shown her kindness once, giving her and the girls a ride when they had nothing. He ran a route to the Northern Territories. She wrote a letter. A simple, desperate plea for information about a man named Cyrus Blackwood and any connection he might have to Jedediah Miller. also known as Jericho. She gave the letter to Silas, along with the last piece of jewelry she owned, a small silver locket from her mother. "Please," she begged him, "it's a matter of life and death." Silas looked at her, his old eyes seeing the desperation she tried to hide. He pushed the locket back into her hand. "Keep it, child. Some things are more important than money." Now all she could do was wait. A few days later, Jed made one of his mandated visits. He was more arrogant than ever, strolling around the ranch as if he already owned it. He left his saddlebag on the porch railing. It was a careless, confident gesture. And as Olivia watched him ride away, she saw that he'd forgotten it. Something compelled her. A gut feeling. That night, after everyone was asleep, she crept out to the porch and took the saddlebag. Inside, beneath a flask of whiskey and a spare deck of cards, she found it. A small leather-bound ledger. She opened it, her hands trembling. The pages were filled with columns of numbers and names. But it was written in some kind of code. Symbols and abbreviations she didn't understand. But she recognized some of the names. They were ranchers from the valley, her own neighbors. And next to each name was a number. A large number. It looked like a list of debts. She didn't know what it meant, but a cold dread washed over her. This was more than just a family dispute. This was something bigger, something far more sinister. And they were standing right in the middle of it. 2 weeks passed, 2 weeks of agonizing tension. Jed grew bolder, his visits more frequent. He started talking about the future, about how the girls would be better off with a father who could provide for them, a father with wealth and status. He was trying to break her, to make her give up. Then, one afternoon, Silas the stagecoach driver returned. He handed Olivia a sealed envelope. His face was grim. "The man you asked about?" he said, his voice low. "Cyrus Blackwood. He's not just a man, miss. He's a plague." Olivia's hands shook as she opened the letter. It was from a contact of Silas's, a retired lawman from up north. The words on the page confirmed her worst fears, and then created new ones she couldn't have imagined. Cyrus Blackwood was a ruthless land baron. His method was infamous. He would send an advance man into a new territory. This man, charming and flush with cash, would indebt the local ranchers, buying up their loans from the banks. Then Blackwood would orchestrate a natural disaster, a cattle plague, a diverted stream, a suspicious fire. When the ranchers were at their most vulnerable, he'd call in the debts, and he would take their land for pennies on the dollar. The letter ended with a chilling sentence. Blackwood's most effective advance man, the one they call the Serpent, is his own son, a charismatic monster who goes by many names. The last one I heard was Jedediah Miller. It all clicked into place. The sabotage, the ledger of debts, Jed's sudden wealth. He wasn't here for her. He wasn't here for the girls. He was here to break Logan Braxton and seize control of the entire valley. The Braxton Ranch, with its prime grazing land and abundant water, was the key. If it fell, the rest of Dust Creek would follow. She and her daughters weren't a family he wanted to reclaim. They were leverage, a tool to torment and distract Logan while the real plan unfolded. She ran to find Logan, the letter clutched in her hand. He was down at the creek, reinforcing the bank. He listened as she read the letter aloud, his face becoming a mask of stone. He wasn't surprised. He was furious. Furious that he had been so focused on the personal threat that he hadn't seen the bigger game being played. "He's been buying up my neighbor's debts," Logan said, his voice tight with rage, "turning them against me while he quietly positions himself to ruin them." But their revelation had come too late. As they stood there, a line of riders appeared on the horizon. They weren't cowboys. They were hard-faced men with guns on their hips and a coldness in their eyes. Enforcers. They rode into Dust Creek, not as investors, but as an occupying army. Cyrus Blackwood's trap had been sprung. The town was officially under siege. The enforcers, led by a mountain of a man with a scarred face, wasted no time. They went from ranch to ranch, not asking, but demanding. "Your loan has been acquired by our employer," they would say. "It's due in full. Now." Panic spread through the valley like a wildfire. Ranchers who had been suspicious of Logan were now faced with losing everything. They were trapped, just as the letter had described. Jedediah, or Mr. Jericho, dropped his friendly facade. He was now the smiling face of their ruin. He rode out to the Braxton ranch, this time alone. No sheriff, no pretense. He found Olivia by the barn. "It's over," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "My father is a patient man, but his patience has limits. This valley is his." "You're a monster," she spat. He laughed. "I'm a businessman, and right now I'm offering you a deal. Convince your stoic protector to sign his land over to us. A peaceful transition. In return, I'll give you and the girls enough money to disappear. A fresh start, somewhere far away from here. And if I don't?" His smile vanished. His eyes turned deadly. "Then my father's methods get less subtle. Fires have a way of starting on their own, and little girls have a way of getting lost in the woods, permanently." The threat hung in the air, vile and terrifying. "You wouldn't dare," she whispered, her blood running cold. "Don't test me, Olivia," he sneered. "I've always gotten what I want. And speaking of the girls, it's probably time you knew the truth." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "They're not mine." The world tilted beneath Olivia's feet. "What? You heard me?" he said, enjoying her shock. "Their father was some poor dirt farmer you were married to for 5 minutes before he had the good sense to drop dead of cholera. I found you in that pathetic little town, widowed and starving. You were the perfect cover story. A desperate woman with 2 adorable and conveniently silent little props. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Her entire past, the narrative of her suffering, was another one of his lies. He had found her at her lowest and used her children, as part of this monstrous, long-running con. "No one will ever believe you," she said, her voice trembling. "They don't have to," he said with a final chilling grin. "All they have to do is watch Logan Braxton burn." He turned and mounted his horse, leaving her standing there, shattered. Her past wasn't just a story of a bad choice, it was a story of pure evil. But as he rode away, he didn't see the figure standing in the shadows of the hayloft. Clara Bennett. She had heard everything, every last poisonous word. The housekeeper, the woman who had distrusted Olivia from the start, now saw the truth. This wasn't about a fallen woman bringing bad luck. This was about a wolf in sheep's clothing trying to devour them all. And Clara's loyalty to the Braxton land, to the memory of Logan's father, was absolute. That evening, as a storm gathered in the mountains, Clara came to Logan and Olivia. Her face was set, her eyes burning with a righteous fury. "I was wrong about you," she said to Olivia, her voice rough with emotion. Then she turned to Logan. "Your father, he always said this land was special, that it held a secret. He never told me what it was. But he left this for you. He told me to give it to you only when the ranch was in its darkest hour." She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small, oilskin-wrapped package. Logan carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a hand-drawn map. It was old, the ink faded, but the lines were clear. It was a map of the Braxton Ranch. But it wasn't a map of property lines or grazing pastures. It was a map that led to a specific point, high up in the Rocky Canyons, a point marked with a single blue teardrop-shaped symbol. "It's not gold," Clara said. "Your father told me that much. He said it was something far more valuable." They stared at the map. What could be more valuable than gold? What secret did this land hold that a man like Cyrus Blackwood would go to such lengths to possess it? As they tried to decipher the map's cryptic markings, the door creaked open. It was Ellie, the other twin. Like her sister, she had been a silent observer of all the chaos. She walked over to Olivia and held up a piece of paper. It was a child's drawing. On it, she had drawn the coiled rattlesnake symbol she must have seen on the barn door before Logan removed it. The snake man's mark. But Ellie had added something. Her drawing of the snake had two heads. Olivia stared at it. A two-headed snake. A memory, hazy and distant, flickered in her mind. A dusty town, a sheriff's office, a wall of wanted posters. She had seen that symbol before, years ago. It wasn't just Jed's personal mark. It wasn't just the brand of the Blackwood Empire. It was the mark of the Ouroboros gang, a notoriously violent group of outlaws wanted for robbery and murder in 3 territories. A gang that had seemingly vanished years ago. And then she remembered the face on the poster. A younger face, but the eyes were the same, cold and empty. The name wasn't Jedediah Miller. It was Jackson Deuce Cole. Jed wasn't just Cyrus Blackwood's son. He was a wanted murderer. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Logan had the map to the land's secret, and Olivia had the key to the man's. The game had changed. They weren't just defending the ranch anymore. They were going to take the fight to him. The secret of the Braxton Ranch wasn't gold. It was life itself. The map led them high into the canyons to a hidden cave behind a waterfall. Inside, bubbling up from the heart of the earth, was an artesian well, a source of fresh, clean water that never ran dry. Not in the harshest winter, not in the driest summer. In a land where water was everything, this well made the Braxton Ranch the most valuable piece of property for 1,000 miles. This was what Blackwood was after. Control the water, and you control the entire territory. Logan and Olivia looked at each other. They finally had a weapon. They rode back to the ranch, a plan forming in their minds. A desperate, dangerous plan. They couldn't fight Blackwood's enforcers with guns. They were outnumbered and outmatched, but they could fight with the truth. Logan sent his most trusted ranch hand to ride through the night to every ranch in the valley. He carried a message, a call for a meeting at dawn, at the old cottonwood tree on Braxton land. As the sun rose, they came, the ranchers, men with worried faces and rifles cradled in their arms. They were beaten down, ready to surrender. They looked at Logan with a mixture of resentment and despair. Logan stood before them, not as a cattle baron, but as one of them. He didn't make a speech. He just unrolled the map. He told them about the well. He told them about Cyrus Blackwood's plan to steal their heritage and control their future. "He wants to bleed this valley dry," Logan said, his voice ringing with conviction. "But he can't do it if we stand together." He made them an offer, not charity, a pact, shared access to the well, a water cooperative, an unbreakable alliance that would ensure their collective survival, making them immune to Blackwood's manufactured droughts. Hope, a thing they hadn't felt in weeks, began to flicker in their eyes. Then, Olivia stepped forward. She held up the drawing Ellie had made, the two-headed snake, and she told them her story. The real story. She told them about Jackson Deuce Cole, the wanted murderer masquerading as their savior. She didn't have the wanted poster itself, only her memory. It was her word against his. But as the ranchers looked at her, at the quiet strength in her eyes, they saw not a woman of ill repute, but a survivor who had looked evil in the face and refused to blink. They were in. All of them. The valley was ready to fight back. Their procession rode into Dust Creek not as a mob, but as a unified front. They found Jed, his enforcers, and the spineless Sheriff Brody right in the middle of Main Street, preparing to serve the first eviction notice. Jed laughed when he saw them. "Come to beg, Braxton?" "No," Logan said, his voice calm and clear. "We've come to serve you." "Is that so?" Jed sneered. "And on what authority?" "On the authority of a federal warrant," a new voice boomed. Riding up the street from the other direction was a troop of U.S. Marshals, their badges glinting in the morning sun. Silas, the old stagecoach driver, had done more than just deliver Olivia's letter. He had seen the enforcers arrive. He knew what was happening. He had ridden day and night to the nearest federal outpost and brought back the law. One of the marshals held up a wanted poster. On it was the face of Jackson Deuce Cole. It was Jed. The game was up. The color drained from Jed's face. His enforcers, hired thugs, not loyal soldiers, began to back away, dropping their guns. They were bullies, not warriors. Sheriff Brody, seeing his own future dangling from a rope, quickly tried to switch sides. "He tricked me. I had no idea." Jed was trapped, cornered. In a final, desperate act of cowardice, he lunged for Olivia, grabbing one of the twins, Annie, and pulling her in front of him as a shield. He pressed a pistol to her head. "Nobody moves!" he screamed, his voice cracking. The crowd gasped. Logan's heart stopped. But Olivia didn't scream. She looked directly into her daughter's eyes. "It's okay, Annie," she said, her voice impossibly calm. "Look at me." And then something incredible happened. Annie, the little girl who had been silent for so long, spoke. Her voice was clear and strong. "You're not my father," she said, looking straight at Jed. "You're the Snake Man, and I'm not afraid of you." The defiance, so pure and so brave, startled Jed for just a fraction of a second. It was all Logan needed. He moved like a blur, a predator striking. He didn't go for the gun. He kicked Jed's knee from the side, buckling it. As Jed stumbled off balance, Logan brought the butt of his rifle down hard on the hand holding the pistol. The gun clattered to the ground. Jed howled in pain, and it was over. The marshals swarmed him, clapping him in irons. The ranchers ran Blackwood's remaining men out of town, their united fury a force of nature. Justice, swift and absolute, had come to Dust Creek. The valley was saved. Dust Creek didn't just rebuild, it was reborn. The water pact Logan created became the foundation of a new community, one built on cooperation and trust, not suspicion. Jedediah Miller, or Jackson Cole, was sent away to face a federal judge and a hangman's noose. The shadow of Cyrus Blackwood never fell on the valley again. Olivia was no longer the broken woman who had arrived on the church steps. She was a hero, the woman who had saved them with her courage and her refusal to stay silent. One evening, as the sun set, she and Logan stood beneath the old cottonwood tree, the place where it had all begun. The twins, Annie and Ellie, were chasing fireflies nearby, their laughter, real, joyous laughter, filling the air. They talked constantly now, making up for years of silence. Logan turned to Olivia. He didn't have a ring. He didn't have a prepared speech. He just had the truth. "I don't have promises of an easy life, Olivia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I have a home, and land, and a heart that has belonged to you since we were children." He took her hands in his. "I'm not asking you to be my second chance," he said. "I'm asking to be your partner. In all of it. The good, the bad, the building. Let's build it together." Tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I have walked through fire," she said, her voice steady. "I have carried my children through darkness, and I am not broken." She looked at this man, this steady, honorable man who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. "I choose this life," she said, "and I choose you. Not because I need a place to stay, but because with you, I am finally home." He kissed her then. A kiss that wasn't about passion or desperation, but about permanence. About two broken halves finally becoming whole. The wind rustled through the leaves of the cottonwood above them like a whispered blessing from the land itself. Dust Creek had survived its storm. And for Olivia and Logan, standing together with their two laughing daughters, the future stretched out before them, as wide and promising as the Montana sky. If you were inspired by Olivia's journey from a broken past to a powerful future, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Because sometimes the strongest homes are the ones we build ourselves.